Good evening, everybody. This is Matt Webster again with the Christian Journey series. Uh, Today, we're finally on a couple of the characters that are very near and dear to my heart. Of the characters on my list of prayers that I ask for qualities of. This character in particular is something that I think represents in modern times what a good man should be. Um, so, without a lot of bluster and whatnot, I just want to get into this one. So, this character has a secondary name, which is Captain America. But the character that I specifically want to talk about is Steve Rodgers. Now, for most of you, I'm assuming you know who Captain America is, and I'm assuming most of you know who Steve Rodgers is at this point. The Marvel movies are some of the biggest movies in the last 20 years. Having said that, I specifically I'm choosing the MCU's version. Granted, there's a quote that I'm going to use that's actually his from the comics that's used by another character in one of the movies. Now, to kind of get into the backstory of this character from the MCU, when we first meet Steve, he's a guy trying to enlist in the U.S. Army, and he's denied because of his size, his medical conditions. There's like a whole list of things that he gets denied for. But he's persistent and he keeps trying. One of his big defining qualities is that he doesn't like bullies, even so much to the point where when he's at a movie, there's a guy just being an absolute jerk to everyone in the movies and causing a scene, and he stands up and says something. Then they cut to a scene where he goes into a back alley and he gets his butt handed to him before his friend Bucky comes and saves him. Now we skip a little bit ahead here. Character just wants to do the best that he can for everyone else, but he's given an opportunity, but not before being questioned and tested. And the doctor, I don't remember his name. Forgive my lack of knowledge on this one, but when the doctor asked him this question, it was, "Do you want to kill Nazis?" And his answer was, "No, I just don't like bullies. It doesn't matter where they're from." As a kid watching these movies, it was kind of a big moment for me because around the same time I was fighting back against bullies and stuff. We had one of the really weird schools where we still had, I would say, class segregation. What I mean by that is, are you a nerd? Are you a jock? Are you this and that? I never really fit in with any group directly. I got labeled one of the kings of the nerds, even though I had a whole bunch of talents and stuff, and I never really invested in just one directly. I just wanted to be the guy that was amongst the groups and kind of like the peacemaker, so to speak. Which is part of the reason why this character is so special to me. Thing too is that this character represents a lot more than just that. It represents what the ideal values of any one American man should be, let alone any man of the world. And I think that's one of the things that people often forget. He may be Captain America, but really he's the ideal man in some regards. Not to say that he didn't have flaws and stuff. Man was plagued with self-doubt, something else I share in common with him. And I think a lot of men, especially of today's day and age, struggle with that. Kind of give some representation too of what I'm talking about. I love this character so much, in fact, that years and years and years ago, I went and purchased the Shield, which kind of goes along with something else with that dream that I was mentioning in my video before. I've always had a really strong affinity with Captain America on the sense of the shield, because he was a shield in a sense of not having the shield, but he was the shield. He was the person who stood between evil and the rest of the world, and he didn't necessarily need more than the shield. There's even a line in the movie where the doctor was asked why him, and he said he was looking for traits that weren't physical. And I think this kind of goes along with something that's in the Bible about David. David was selected by God not because of physical qualities, but it was because he was a man after God's own heart. Steve Rodgers represents that in so many ways. And you can see it throughout the movie too. His compassion for other people goes beyond what most people would be willing to do. He loses his friend in the first movie, then he's frozen for, I think it was 80, 90 years. And when he comes out of being frozen, coma, he wakes up to a world that's so different to him, and in a way it's traumatizing. Which is something else I found out too. So with this character on the list and the next one, because this character is the 6th person on the list, and each of these characters have also represented a number. Now, 6 represents, in my opinion, the evil within man, the beast that lurks within. And I wanted to know what Captain America's biggest flaw was, or what it was perceived to be. Through a lot of research and stuff, most people consider his greatest flaw being the fact that he was willing to help others, but never really able to truly process his own trauma. And that was the fact that he lost friends, he lost time, he lost being with the woman that he loved, who was Peggy Carter, which I'll get more to in a minute. That process trauma was kind of a hard thing for him to learn to deal with and cope with, even so much so to the fact that a lot of people say he kind of ran from it even in the end. Going into the second movie though, another quality I find very special and redeeming about Steve Rodgers. He's never willing to give up on friends. Even so much so that his new friend, Falcon, Sam Wilson, tells him he doesn't think that Bucky is a friend who can be saved. He has to be stopped. And even knowing that, Steve still tries to save him, to pull him from the fire, the wreckage of his mind. Which, this movie actually has a lot of Christian things in it if you really think about it. The battle of the mind is the battle of the spirit, and sometimes it's really hard to watch and see how your friends struggle with that battle when you've been down that road yourself. There's something else I relate well to Cap. I've always been the person willing to put myself last to pull my friends from the fire, and realizing more and more that maybe there's a little bit of pride in that, which is something else that I think Cap struggles with, is pride. He's a human who's got humility, but he also still suffers a great deal from pride because he's always going that extra step without any thought to himself, which kind of brings up the thing about not loving yourself. Well, then we get to a movie like Age of Ultron, where he's asked this, he's talking to Ultron, which is this robot thing that they fight, robot AI specifically, which I think is funny considering times now. Ultron says that he's God's righteous man, but he's a man who couldn't fight without a war. And there's a lot of truth in that too with his character, and it's again something that I think maybe I personally struggle with in my own life, is that I'm looking for the fight, and I'm also looking for the people that I think need to be rescued. It's a truth that's maybe a little bit hard to swallow, and it can be something that a lot of people struggle with. Personally, if I'm being honest, I've enjoyed the fight. Maybe it's because I never felt like I had much to offer, so I put myself in the fight because it's what I felt I had to offer. Then we get to the third movie, which is Civil War, where he goes up against Tony Stark, Iron Man. And it's an interesting thing because they're like really good friends, but Tony feels betrayed by him when he finds out that his best friend Bucky, even though he's been under a mind control and he hasn't been right in his head and he's been under attack, had killed Tony's parents. In particular, it was his mom that he felt really strongly about. And while I understand the idea that like you love your family and you want to do anything for them and you would even want to avenge them, I think Cap embodies the most Christian quality that we can see in any of the movies, which, again, God's righteous man. He practices forgiveness, and he even says that he was under the control of whatever. I think the problem is like he tries to remove responsibility of what Bucky did, which is probably not the best thing. But it's understanding that even though Bucky did it, that there needs to be forgiveness. And I think that understanding how Tony feels is hard for him because of the fact that he wants to do right by Tony, but at the same time he wants to protect his friend. And this is a friend that he grew up with that he thought he had lost, and for all intents and purposes he did for a long time lose Bucky. Now, that movie also has a thing with political systems, and like every one of these movies shows a political corruption and what happens. Hydra very much so represents what our modern society has become with politics and stuff, and like, don't kid yourself if you don't think that there's not corruption on every level. In fact, we probably have our own Hydra growing right now in this country, regardless if people want to see it. I mean, the Epstein files kind of make it seem like Hydra's a thing, if I'm being honest. Maybe not literal Hydra, but they are the closest representation we have probably had. Now, Cap often bucks the system. Steve does not believe in the things that other people do. There's a line in the second movie, going back to Winter Soldier, where he's talking to Nick Fury, who's the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is like the secret undercover agency that tries to stop the bad guys. Kind of like the CIA, personally, is what I feel. Again, I don't completely trust the CIA. I think that, and that's not to sound paranoid, but I think we'd be fools not to question some of the stuff that happens and why things are just now being found out when they should have known about these things way ahead of time. Having said that, they're on the elevator and there's these machines where they're talking about killing a lot of threats before they happen. And Steve has said to Nick, so you hold a gun to the whole world's head and call it freedom. And then there's this whole conversation and dialect about him needing to get with the times, and Cap says, don't hold your breath. I feel strongly with this because I'm somebody that if I see something wrong with the system, I call it out. I'm not someone that stands back and lets the world burn. Maybe it's gotten me in a little bit of trouble in my life, and maybe there's a little, again, pride with this, but I'm not someone willing to back down just because of the sake of what other people say. Now there's another quote in the movie, the third movie of Civil War, where they're signing these things to hand over their freedoms and powers to the government, and Steve says to everyone that their hands on the wheel are still the best kept hands or something like that. Basically the idea is that you don't give your God-given authority to someone else for them to dictate what you do. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean you don't give it to God, but it does mean that you don't give it to the people who seek to control you, which is just the devil at work. I mean, it's been proven time and time again through history. Anytime we let go of the power that God gives us, we're basically giving into the hands of the enemy. There's another quote, though, that in the comics, it is actually said by Cap. In the movie, it's said by Sharon Carter, who's a friend of Cap's, who kind of becomes his girlfriend, I guess. Not really, since they kind of killed that in the movies. The quote is, though, and I'll read it here from my little paper. Your job is to plant yourself like a tree beside the river of truth and tell the whole world No, you move. Um, this quote, when it was said, I'll be honest, it hit like a truck, because I knew right then and there that I was on the right path to begin with in life, and I kind of somehow got steered off of it. Um, maybe it was out of fear and pride because of the fact that I had so many people telling me that I'd never amount to anything, I'd never do anything. And I kind of had this Steve Rodgers complex, the little guy, who I was so eager to prove myself and do things that it kind of derailed me. And those voices from the world were drowning out what I knew in my heart to be right. And there's a lot of times where I think about things and, like, had I spoken up when I could have been a better protector, because it's another reason why the shield, in my opinion, is so much more important, because it represents the ability to protect, to shield people from incoming attacks. In the Bible, it talks about lifting up the shield of faith. And you're going to face attacks every day of your life, especially when you're doing the right thing. And make no mistake that the world is against you when you do these things, which is why that quote's so important, to plant yourself like a tree. Because you have to tell the world no. I strongly believe this. I strongly stand by that, and I will take it to my grave with me if that's what fate has in store. Personally, I don't believe that's what God has in store. In fact, I think God has a much bigger plan than I can even hope to imagine. Now, going back to what I was saying earlier about Steve's biggest flaw. People said he kind of avoided wanting to process his trauma, because he should have just stayed in the timeline that he was in and tried to live the best life that he could under the circumstances, instead of trying to go back and live that life that he thought he needed to live. Sometimes as humans, we get caught up in chasing things that weren't intended for us. I'm guilty of this. I do it all the time, and part of it is I try to hold everything together myself. I try to hold it together like glue, and I'm stretching and wearing myself then to a point like what Steve does, where it's like, I just want to be that righteous man, and, like, I want to prove that I can do it, which isn't always the best option. Now, with the next video coming up, I'm going to explain a little bit of a process that happened between this character and the next one, because it was also kind of made obvious from God that there was a process that needs to happen between 6 and 7, which goes into this thing that God's told me I've been a soldier my entire life, and you don't necessarily need to serve in the actual military in the world to be a soldier under God. God calls people to fight for a reason, and I know God's been building me up for something, and I feel like it's maybe a little bit bigger than what I had thought. And quite honestly, I would be lying if I said it wasn't terrifying. But that's the thing, is sometimes God challenges you with fear so that you grow. And knowing that whatever this is He has chosen for me, that it's something I've accepted at this point, and knowing that there are great risks that come with it, but the thing is that I believe strongly that God will carry me through no matter what happens. Anyways, I hope that everyone gets something from this, because I feel like this character may be the second strongest character I feel something towards on this list, other than the one that I'm going to go over in the next video. And I hope that people can see that anything really can be used if you're paying attention to it, and that there's things that are said, and when they're said, that you should be listening. Anyways, catch you guys later.